Last night, President Trump appeared to have his eye on another Georgia race in 2022.
There is no place like a Trump rally, but you know what? This is a Kelly rally and a David rally. And I wouldn't do it unless I loved them both. I wouldn't do it. But I'm going to be here in a year and a half, and I'm going to be campaigning against your governor and your crazy Secretary of State. That I can tell you.
Patricia Murphy joins me now. She is a political reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Patricia, welcome. Thanks for being with us. So where has Governor Brian Kemp been in these final days before the runoffs?
Governor Kemp has been 100% behind the scenes for the two senators. He is very supportive of both Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. He appointed Kelly Loeffler about a year ago to the Senate. She was his choice to take that seat. And in ordinary days, he would be out there campaigning with both of these two senators, and he would be the big draw at the events. And it would be a threefer going across the state in an airplane and doing fly-arounds, and they would be really grafted at the hip. We have not seen Kemp. He was not invited to the president's rally in Dalton. Even when Kelly Loeffler has been campaigning in these last 2 weeks, Governor Kemp has not been with her publicly. He has been fundraising behind the scenes. He's been doing media appearances, urging Georgia Republicans to get out to vote. But we have seen this major, if not a divide between the two. I don't think they're angry with each other, but I think Kelly Loeffler understands that having Governor Kemp by her side could be very, very damaging to her chances in a Senate election right now because of the fight and the battle that he's in with President Trump. I think it's incredibly relevant for all Republicans in the country to see how this election turns out. It's the first election of the post-Trump era, but President Trump is still at the top of the ticket here in Georgia. He's made himself the middle of this conversation, and it's really had an enormous effect on the Republican Party here in the state.
Yeah, and because of that, Patricia, is this sort of a crossroads moment for Georgia Republicans? You hear the president there saying, I'll guarantee I'll be back in a year and a half to campaign actively against the governor and the Republican Secretary of State. I mean, as you said, in ordinary times, we would have seen that governor there on the stage and traveling on the campaign trail, making very public appearances. But these are no longer ordinary times.
They're not. And you have to understand that these are two conservative Republicans, and Governor Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. They supported President Trump. He endorsed both of them in 2018. So they are not far apart at all ideologically. Their only sin against President Trump was upholding the election results here in Georgia. And both of them have been really steadfast in those choices. And that has just gotten on the absolute wrong side of President Trump. The exact opposite example is Kelly Loeffler. She has been campaigning with President Trump. Obviously, she made an announcement in Dalton last night that she will join in the effort to overturn the Electoral College results, including the results in Georgia. So these are the two examples of the choices Republicans can make right now. They can either be with President Trump or on their own, supportive, but not entirely. And we see the results in the president's behavior, and we're going to see the results of voters, more importantly, tonight.
Right. It doesn't appear as though there is much room for any middle ground there. What have you been hearing from voters about specifically Governor Kemp or Republican Secretary of State Raffensperger? I mean, how much of that is sort of on their radar?
It's at the top of Republican voters' radars. At all of these events, I've asked voters how they're feeling about Governor Kemp, and they're very angry with him. These are people who support President Trump 100%. They follow him on Twitter. They follow him on Newsmax and OANN, and he has been absolutely brutalizing both Raffensperger and Kemp. He said that Kemp should resign. He's called him a loser, a joke. He said he regretted ever endorsing him. And I asked voters what they think about him, the governor, that is, and they say, I'm really worried about him. I liked him until Election Day, and I don't like him anymore. They don't feel like he stood up for these elections. They feel like these elections have been a fraud. That's because the president told them that these have been a fraud. And these Republican voters' loyalty is very clearly with the president. And if the president is against you, those Republican voters are against you as well. And I think that's the lesson we're learning in the short term for Brian Kemp. What does that mean in the long term? We're not sure. I've also heard Democrats who have been thrilled with Brian Kemp. And so it might improve his chances in a general election here in the state, but it could certainly damage him in a primary situation.
Yeah, I can imagine a bruising primary coming up in 2022. Well, you and your colleague, Greg Bluestein, have a new piece going through the key questions you have about these runoff contests. Walk us through some of those.
Sure. Well, the big question for us with Republican voters is what does President Trump's incredible attacks on the Georgia election system do? Does that fire them up to go out and vote en masse, or is that going to depress and suppress their own votes? We don't know the answer to that yet. We're seeing long lines in those Republican area of the states tonight. So maybe they're coming out in large quantities because President Trump told them last night to do that. We're going to see exactly what this very strange, disorderly, chaotic dynamic is going to do to that chunk of the electorate. On the other side, the Democrats have some metrics that they really need to hit. They're going to need to win about 30% of the white vote here in the state, and they're going to need to have the electorate be made up of about 30% African Americans. If they can marry those two numbers together, they're going to be doing very, very well. We have a diverse electorate down here in Georgia, and the Democrats need to really reach the diverse electorate, but also keep a sizable portion of the white electorate in order to win statewide. And then we're also going to be looking for turnout. The suburban areas of Atlanta especially have trended very Democratic, and that is starting to edge out to the exurban counties, Cherokee County, Henry County. We're going to be looking at those counties very, very closely to see if the Democrats are bumping their numbers up very slightly, and that would be very meaningful. And the final thing that we're looking at is how close are these elections? If it's a very narrow margin, it's going to be a really long time to count these votes. It took 10 days to call Georgia in November. The closer it is, the more difficult it is for news organizations to even estimate who could have won. And then we'll see not only who wins, but who admits they lost. Conceding in Georgia is not a thing right now. And so the president doesn't have to concede. We don't know even if somebody loses, if they're going to admit that they lost and move on and help the voters move on as well.